All right, we have a special guest with us today, a longtime member of the surfing world, having worked in magazines, the industry, and beyond. He now leads a company that is deeply integrated into not only our own operations at the WSL, but likely every surfer's daily life. A company dedicated to producing the most innovative and useful forecasting services for surfers and ocean enthusiasts, which tracks swell models all across the globe. He also happens to be a very high-level surfer himself. We have the CEO of Surfline, Ross Garrett, with us today. Ross, thank you so much for coming on the lineup.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate the intro. Stoked to be here.
Now we
kind words.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And we caught up a little bit yesterday, but for our listeners, where are you today and what are you up to?
Sure. Yeah. I'm in Nicaragua with my family. We have a work from anywhere policy in Surfline. So I'm not here on the beach, at least not all day, but I am here doing work and my family's here with me and it's, waves are pretty good. I give you the report. It's, let's call it 3 to 4 and fair to good.
Oh, okay. I like that. Now I was going to ask, so since you are, as we said, very high level surfer yourself, and when you go on surf trips, are you checking your own product to see how accurate the forecast is? And if there's any little degree that's off, are you sending emails inside the company about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's people that are better at it than I am, in terms of just being all over the conditions and, being hypercritical. That having said that, like I am kind of user testing everywhere I go. And so we've got, whether it's the wind model or it's a live wind station or it's the energy or the spectra or now Premium Plus where we've got smart cams. I'm using them. I'm sending feedback and really close to the product team, very focused on building product at Surfline.
I love it. So if we check this week, if we check like the Surfline wave report for Nicaragua, because you guys have your forecasters that put their names to it, like are we going to see Ross's name next to a few lines of copy about what the conditions look like?
No, nobody wants me to do that. Chris Borg is doing an amazing job with the analysis for here, and but yeah, maybe in the background they'll pick up a little bit of intel.
Right. I'm now 41, and that line of like, I'm old enough to remember when is now hitting me more and more week in and week out. But when it comes to Surfline and WaveTrack, like I'm old enough to remember when it was a hotline you used to call up. And it's evolved so much in the last couple of decades. I think most of our listeners, as we said, are daily surfers themselves. They're probably very familiar with it, but as the CEO, could you describe what Surfline WaveTrack is and what it does in 2024?
Yeah, I can. I think I want to reflect on that comment you made, though, because I think it's just so fantastic to think about a time when Surfline didn't exist. People forget, we all forget what it was like to not really know. You heard about a storm perhaps up in the North Pacific, or more so you'd hear about a hurricane coming off of Baja as a Southern California surfer, and you'd get your hopes up that maybe something was going to happen. And to truly be a committed surfer, you had to live your life ready to drop everything at the beat of a swell. And Surfline, this wasn't me, this was far before my time, but Surfline really changed the paradigm in terms of what it meant to be a surfer and made it possible to have a kind of normal structured life and plan around surfing. So super interesting just to think about that dichotomy. Back to your question though, which was, what does Surfline do? Essentially what we do is tell people what's happening in the ocean, tailored towards a surf use case. So what's happening with the swell, what's happening swell direction, what's happening with the wind, wave quality. We forecast that out 17 days. We have a team of 12 human forecasters that are specially trained to read the tea leaves for surfers who write analysis and create content that you can go deep on to understand what's happening and what's forecasted to happen in the surf. And then we marry that with 1,000 live streaming cameras around the globe that people can tune into to see what's happening real time in the surf. And on that part of the business, we've added on some additional functionality and features, which are super exciting. We put them under a higher price tier we call Premium Plus, and that just launched a couple of weeks ago. And it's taking that camera network and really elevating the value that we deliver through those cameras. So I'm sure we'll end up talking about that today. But in a nutshell, that's what we do. We marry all that to also with an editorial package focused on our 4 key markets: the UK, the USA, Australia, and New Zealand. Mm-hmm. And so we put out things like Maps to Nowhere. Most recently, we're working with Dylan Graves on Weird Waves and helping to produce and distribute that. So it's a fun, robust business. And hopefully most of your listeners have gotten to experience Surfline and use it. And if they haven't, I'd encourage them to go out and do it, download the app and check it out.
I liked your comment about, being able to have a balanced life by virtue of just more information, because I think if you think back, like surfers have never been information averse. They've always been, calling up buoy reports and looking at charts, etc. And I think of this all the time, just without information, the amount of time it takes to be a surfer day in and day out to go, all right, what's the swell doing? What's the tide doing? What's the wind doing? What are the sandbars doing? And just the hours that go into maybe a 30-minute or an hour-long session. And I've said this a little bit on the podcast before, but the last couple of years, my kids and I have gotten into climbing, and I'm like, I don't have to think at all about it. It's like the rock is always there. It's always the same, and we just go. But as a surfer, having all that information and having all of those tools, as you pointed out, it's like people have jobs, they got mortgages, they got families and kids and relationships, and you want to have a balanced life. All those tools and all that information just allows you to be a much more effective surfer in a way. And it sounds like that is kind of at the core of the premium plus level, as well as just you have all these base tools, but now you can have even more tools. And I think it's a good opportunity to talk about that now, if you don't mind.
Yeah, happy to talk about it. I think, there's several things in there that I'd love to talk about as well, but I'll tell you more about Premium Plus to start. So Premium Plus, I mentioned we've got 1,000 streaming cameras around the world. You can tune into them live. You can go back and check the recordings, which used to be in these 10-minute segments, stretching back 5 days. So we've taken those 1,000 cameras and we've made 100 of them so far, and more to come. We've made 100 of them smart cameras, so that the cameras are watching the surf and the conditions for you all day, so that you don't have to. And it probably sounds a little weird and esoteric, so I'll give you a story of how this comes to life, like for me. And it's centered around my kids. I got 2 boys. They're super into surfing. They have exceeded my abilities, and it's super fun to try and pal around with them. But they ran up to lowers and I was at home working, and they were there with a couple of friends. And so I just wanted to tune in and see what's happening. And we have, the first thing I'll point out is a thing called the wave timeline. So you pull up the camera on a smart cam and you have this new graph that's beneath the camera, and it segments out ridden waves from unridden waves. And then it tells you on the y-axis, it tells you the surf height. So you can scrub back using your thumb right to where you see a wave. And you can choose, what do I want to look at? A big wave, a small wave, a ridden wave, an unridden wave. And you can see very clearly what's happening in the lineup. And on that day in particular, it was really fascinating. We think about sets. People time the sets. Oh, they come every 10 minutes. They come every 20 minutes on a given day. Well, that's not exactly true. And on this particular day, I looked at the 30-minute segment that was in the wave timeline, and there was this giant set for about 10 minutes in the middle of a 30-minute span. And I went, God, that's really odd. And I went back, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes. And it was the only set of its kind.
Right.
Right. So imagine you pulled up the camera at that moment and this set's happening and it's double the size of all the other waves. You're like, oh, I'm out there. it's pumping and I'm going to take my step up. Right. If you scroll just 10 minutes either side of it, you'd realize actually it's half that size.
Right.
So
right.
The wave timeline gives you a ton of insight into what's happened in the ocean, so that you don't have to watch the camera all day long to try and figure that out. Beneath that, we've got a couple new bits of information that help you kind of optimize your surfing experience. So the first one is the insights graph, and it takes those same ridden waves and breaks them out by segment. So how many 3-foot waves, how many 4-foot waves, how many 5-foot waves, et cetera. And then it'll show you how many of those have been ridden versus unridden. And the way I use that is, for example, if I was going to paddle out that day at lowers, I might see that, hey, there's a bunch of 6-footers that are going unridden, and those are out the back, and no one's sitting out the back to catch those. I'm going to go out there and sit and wait. And it, appears as though, they're happening frequently. Conversely, the opposite happens, right? There could be a bunch of 4-footers on the inside, nobody's catching. Just kind of helps you optimize. Okay, where should I sit? Adjacent to that, we've got the crowd graph, and crowd is, so there's a prediction and an observation. The prediction is based off of a couple of years of observed data to tell when certain conditions happen and certain seasonality and certain days of the week, how does the crowd trend through the day? And then we layer an observation over that. So it's all stuff you can see with your naked eye. It's nothing, there's no hocus pocus there. It's just giving it to you in a really simple fashion. And then the third component of Premium Plus is we've turbocharged the rewinds experience. Are you a rewinds user, Dave? Do you get into that?
I don't for myself, but I've got 10-year-old twins, and actually one of them's at surf camp this week, and I have been hitting the rewind option. And like, he'll come home and he's like, it's a pretty energetic kid, and he's just been dead. And I'm like, man, what's been going on? And it is so fast how I can toggle and rewind and like catch all of his waves. I'm like, dude, you caught like 30 waves in 45 minutes. No wonder you're exhausted, kind of thing. Like, but it's an awesome feature.
Yeah, so we've just turbocharged that, and I don't know if you've used the Premium Plus experience, but I used it for the exact same purpose on that day at Lowers. I knew my boys were out there, so I went to the graph. We call it the dotty graph internally, but it's basically dots on a timeline by wave height, ridden and unridden. So you can go through all the ridden waves, just wave by wave by wave, and then maybe this is what you did, and you can find the one you're looking for. And when you hit save and share, it just automatically trims the wave. It backs up like 3 seconds before you take off and 3 seconds after the kick out. And there you go. You got your ride, and you can save it, share it, learn from it. So it's a really delightful little improvement to that. We call it Smart Clips experience on Surfline.
Yeah. There's two things that make me that I want to respond to there. The first is just how cool all that data is to giving you a more accurate picture of what the lineup's doing, as opposed to like the wake up and check it crowd, which admittedly I am myself a lot just for timeline purposes. But every surfer's turned up and been like, oh, it's pumping, and then they get out there and the people out there are like, that was the only set that's come in like the last hour, kind of thing. Yeah. Going, what am I doing?
How many times does that happen?
Oh, yeah. It feels like every time for me. But yeah. The second piece on the data one, it feels like such a quantum leap. And I wonder what the applications would be, even for those like high level surf coaches, like your Luke Egans and your Mike Parsons and, your Richard Dog Marshes, your Glenn Micro Halls, in being able to analyze their own surfers in a session, whether it's at Lowers or somewhere else, and just looking at the data without actually watching the vision and saying like, hey, in the mix, like, you identified, the 3 best waves that came through in these 45 minutes. That's like, that feels like a huge step towards like refining kind of the bleeding edge of performance in a way, because you think of all these other sports like the NFL and the amount of data and insights that the teams and the players and the coaches use are just light years ahead of where we are now. But this feels like a huge step in that direction as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's certainly part of the vision here, is that we can move into, sort of coaching and improvement, whether that's an actual human coach and enabling them to do that better, or through some data that we harvest to help you understand, hey, because now we can also map kind of takeoff zones, right? Right? So I'm giving you a little insight into the roadmap, but we can map takeoff zones and understand where the majority of waves are being caught, and then help you understand like, hey, you're just not sitting in the right spot. Right? If you sit in the right spot, you sit over here a little bit, you're going to catch more waves. For kind of the beginner and intermediate cohort, but also for the advanced cohort, there's a lot to learn. But this is all part of what we talk about. We talk about Surfline being where my surfing life lives. So we want Surfline to be the home for your surfing experience. And so that data around where did I sit, when did I surf, did I have a good session, did I catch a lot of waves, did I not catch a lot of waves, what's the video assets of that experience, the video artifacts of that experience, what do they look like? That's where we're headed, and just, like a kid in a candy store thinking about all the possibilities of what we can do there.
Yeah. You mentioned this a little bit, but in addition to the cameras and the forecasting and all this rad like data uplift that the surfing world can have access to, you guys also do quite a lot of editorial work, and you yourself come from a pretty strong editorial and publishing and storytelling background too. Maps to Nowhere, I think sort of broke the surfing world the other month with, Katie and crew at that right hander. How many personal texts did you get from people going like, where is that wave?
Yeah, yeah, quite a few. And the honest answer is, I don't know. I intentionally bow out of that knowledge. I don't want to know. And that's really like, it speaks to thematically one thing that I hold really dear at Surfline, which is the value of discovery.
Right.
You talked about your kids and their journey on surfing with surfing and kind of discovering that. I'm a coach of a surf team, middle school surf team, and just watching that process up close and getting to relive that and see what it's like to discover, oh, I rode a face wave. Oh, I just discovered that there's this spot down the road from my house that I love. Oh, I just discovered that on a certain swell, the reef always bends the wave in this particular direction. Like, we are advocates and diehard preservationists of that discovery experience. We want to be for that in Surfline and all that we do. So Maps to Nowhere is a great totem to that. We want people to hear and feel like, hey, there's still spots all around the world where you can go and surf, if not completely alone, and many people don't want to do that,
right.
But with very few people and score, and we want to be tools to equip people to do that.
Yeah,
what did you think of Maps to Nowhere? Did you enjoy it?
I loved it. I was on a couple of WhatsApp threads, and we were on the Reddit boards and the Google Earth searching. I think we identified where it was. But yeah, I mean, I just think it's cool. And it does seem like that element and that theme of discovery, it runs through the other series as well, like Weird Waves. And I'd imagine, again, coming from your background, being able to embark upon storytelling and support these content series that are almost supercharged because of Surfline's understanding and expertise in forecasting, in swell maps, in just understanding the ocean. It's probably really exciting because we've all heard the horror stories of magazine trips where it's like we spent so much money and we turned up and we got skunked for a month kind of thing. But I'd imagine that the Surfline content series, they probably skew much lower on getting skunked compared to some of the other ones.
You better hope so. We throw, yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a great way to test our tools, right? Like if we can't do it, then our users can't, but we can. And so hopefully our users do too. We just really want to inspire people to get out there and have their own Maps to Nowhere experience and have their own, whether that's down the street or, halfway across the world, using our tool set. There's just so much depth, I think, within Surfline that people can and should use to have those experiences. And I just want to encourage everybody to do that.
Right on. We are going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to dive into Mr. Ross Garrett's background. We'll be right back. All right, we are coming back. This is the lineup. I am Dave Prodan here with the CEO of Surfline, Ross Garrett. Ross, you and I have actually kind of intersected over the course of my career in the surfing world because I started out freelance writing at Surfing Magazine, and I know you had a background in publishing, and I always remember, I'm like, oh, Ross Garrett, and whether it was at Surfline or Surfer or wherever, I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy knows what he's doing. He's a mover and a shaker, and he's my boss's 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 boss on a lot of occasions. But where did you come from originally? Like, born and raised, where'd you come from originally?
Yeah, so I'm from North County, San Diego. Grew up in the Solana Beach and Del Mar area. But I love that. I love that intersection that you pointed out. We have had a lot of paths crossed, and I've always taken note of you and the work that you're doing. And so stoked to see what you're doing at the WSL. But yeah, so born and raised there. I got up to LA for college, lived in Dana Point for a little bit, working at Surfer Magazine, which is where I cut my teeth. I was on the editorial team at Surfer under Sam George. Fast forward a couple of iterations from there, I was a publisher at Surfing Magazine, which is really kind of like the business lead of that particular enterprise. And left there, kind of to the shock of lots of people. Publisher job was a pretty coveted job, I guess I would say, and I left it behind to join a guy named Jeff Berg, a women's magazine he had purchased from Steve Zeldin called Foam, and a women's digital property called Girls Learn to Ride. And he just wanted someone to come help him make sense of it. And I just was taken with Jeff. He's a really awesome guy. He is the executive chairman at Surfline today, and made the leap. And we ran at that for a little while. Ended up selling it to a publishing company in Boston. Went and worked with Steve and Debbie Pesman at the Surfers Journal, and ultimately came back over to Surfline. The Foam and Girls Learn to Ride piece was almost like a sister company to Surfline. So we did participate in a little bit of, I did sort of work with those guys a little bit. Ended up back at Surfline on the product side. I joined in product, and for people that aren't working in the digital world, this word is like really weird. Like, what is product, right? Like, you're used to product being like a pen or something physical in the real world. And product is essentially the things we make that you experience on Surfline. So I started there, ultimately ended up as president of the company. And then I left 3 years ago to go join my wife. She had started an interior design business that was taken off. And it just felt like the right time for me to step back from full-time work at Surfline. Did that for 3 years, worked with a couple of fractional customers and clients in addition to her business. I remained on the board at Surfline in a board observer role, and then came back as CEO just about a year ago. It was, about 30 to 60 days from now that I returned as CEO. And it's been a wild ride, 10 months of kind of getting the ship pointed at user benefit and product, and helping surfers make surfers' lives better kind of across the gamut. But that's a little bit of the background, where I come from and the career path.
Totally. And I appreciate that. I think so many of our listeners and I mean, really everyone that takes up surfing, they, myself included, it's like, oh my God, how great would it be if I could work in surfing? And then once you work in surfing, like, oh, grass is always greener sometimes. But, for someone like yourself, like, how did you get into surfing? Did mom and dad surf?
Yeah.
Did you just pick it up? I mean, Solana Beach is such an amazing community, and San Diego over the years has produced such amazing surfers, although they had a bit of a drought before Katie.
Not a lot of world champions. So, yeah.
No, and like not a lot of CT surfers until Katie recently. So Katie and Jake Marshall, I should say. But what was it like growing up, and how did you actually personally start surfing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I had a cousin from Hawaii who I just idolized. He came to San Diego for San Diego State. So he was just kind of pulling me into that. As many people, I think you have this sort of person that you just think is super cool and you just want to be like them. That was in the era of, Dayglow magazines. And turns out this guy named Taylor Steele and his brother Cody, lived in my community, and Taylor started again to get some notoriety. In fact, my first job in the surf industry was packing boxes for his mom, Betty, in the garage, shipping those out to surf shops around the world. And it was just this incredible opportunity because, Taylor would have Shane Dorian or Ross or Kelly, and these folks come into town and they would be surfing my local break at Seaside. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Number one, I will never be good enough at surfing to be one of these guys. So it was very sobering. But number two, I just want to be around this. This is the thing I want to do, And so in college, I ended up, I made a zine. I just got super into the magazine thing. And I interned at Surfer after my freshman year. I just begged and pleaded for Steve Hawk to give me an internship. And he's like, look, you can come down, just open mail. And I just sat in the corner and just opened mail, all summer long and entered Surfer Pool results into a data sheet, but I was so thrilled to be there and be around it. So when you have that passion and you have that thread, I just, I encourage young people all the time. You just got to pull it and pull it hard. And so that was my story. How about you, Dave? How did you get into writing and surfing, and how did you end up on this course?
Right. Well, it's I mean, similar. As a kid that grew up in suburban Orange County and didn't come from a family that surfed, had friends, and we would just rat around, and one of them, their dad surfed, and they started going surfing. And so we had one less friend, and we went, okay, well, we can catch the OC Transit Authority bus and we can get it. And it, takes us 60 minutes to get to San Clemente Pier. And same, just got the bug. And you mentioned kind of that point of discovery. And it's we were so dumb at the time. We were like, we'd watch What's Really Going Wrong. We thought like chop hops were like the most important thing in surfing. Like, I think for the first year, we were like, just catch the biggest whitewash or like the biggest wave you can, go straight and try to do a chop hop. And we're like, that's successful. So it's like explains like zero fundamentals in my surfing after a period of time, but super duper into it. You know, like competed on the high school team, competed at college a little bit, had no idea what I was going to do. Worked at Rip Curl, actually. The surf center. Yeah. Like, started packing boxes. So I was the shipping and receiving guy, and then ended up on the floor. And I always tell like kids too, like similar to you, it's like, well, you know, if you're passionate about something, like be prepared to do it for free. Like don't undervalue yourself, but like go in there and do it. And if you're passionate, that work will hopefully lead to like an opportunity that makes financial sense. And came back from college, was still at the surf shop, started writing similar to you. Like I think I like, it's a little embarrassing now in hindsight, but like watched like a History Channel biography on Hugh Hefner at the time and was like, publishing seems like a good life. Like that seems like, you know, and I'm like, and so I remember I wrote these letters to the magazines at the time, like to Transworld, Surfer, Surfing, I think Water as well, and said like, I'll work in the mailroom, you know, and they're like, we didn't have a mailroom or whatever. And I remember Evan Slater called me and was like, oh, I got your letter. Like, and he's like, we don't have a mailroom, but do you want to freelance, right? And I'd never even considered it. And I said, yeah, sure. And so I started doing that, got the unpaid but telecommute internship at the ASP, and that worked out. And yeah, I just got a job, and so I've been there for like 19 years. I guess it changed a lot, but I mean, it was just similar to you. I guess like I was just passionate about it and was okay. You know, I was talking to actually a colleague of mine yesterday about this, and he said, "Oh, we just ran away and joined the circus." You know, and it didn't matter.
Absolutely.
That we weren't getting paid probably like a living wage. It was like, but someone was gonna fund this lifestyle for a bit. And yeah, that was a really brief version of my start for sure.
That sounds so cool. Yeah, and you mentioned kind of like when your job, your vocation, and your avocation collide. You know, I think there's some magic there. There's also some, you know, there's some challenges with that, right? Like I've never surfed more. In the 3 years where I didn't work in the surf industry was the most I've surfed. You know, and I'm sure you could share. You get to go to incredible places and surf some incredible waves with some incredible people. But if you really want to be a surfer, you may not want to work in the surf industry.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because that's something, it's come up on this podcast a few times of just like when your personal and professional lives are intertwined that way, it's not always like the healthiest situation. And it manifests in like comedic ways too sometimes, where it's like I always kind of giggled when, you know, that Need Essentials brand came on and it was like, we don't have any logos or anything. And I'm like, you know what? I've had it up to here with people at that brand or this brand, like not responding to my emails. I'll go with these people, like, which was always kind of silly. But yeah, but also just kind of like, you know, you have a tough time at work or you have a tough time in this professional community. And then in your free time, you're like, do I really want to do this thing? And I'm in such a better place than I was probably 5 or 10 years ago. And I just go, oh, cool. I can kind of compartmentalize, and my surfing life's my surfing life and my professional life's my professional life. But it's not easy. It's not automatic.
It's not automatic. Yeah. But I do think, I mean, anything you do, right, you're going to have challenges with, compartmentalization, as you mentioned, and just segmenting out fact from fiction. And that's part of why I'm here in Nicaragua now, right? Like connecting, it's so important for me and so important for Surfline to stay connected to the sport, stay connected to the activity, right? The activity and the being advocates for doing the thing and giving people tools to do the thing. And if we don't do the thing, it's hard for us to do that. So, it's a wild journey for sure.
I'm curious to get your take on this too, because, you know, Michael Thompson famously said, you know, size is the enemy of cool. And, you know, related, we're doing a bit of background work on cultures, and we got our hands on a Netflix document, and it talked about how, you know, effectively creative people and companies can be successful. Success leads to growth. Growth leads to complexity. Complexity requires process. Too much process kills creativity, kind of like cycle. And And you know, from the WSL side of things too, like the journey of the last decade post acquisition has been really exciting, but we've certainly, I'd argue, kind of overreached into a lot of spaces that weren't our core competency, and sometimes at the cost of the quality of that core competency. And over the last couple of years, we've really kind of identified our role within the broader surfing ecosystem, which is a really great role. Like, we get to be this platform for the world's best surfing and crown world champions. And when we do that correctly, our relationships with other stakeholders in the ecosystem are that much better. And I'm curious if you've experienced that in any of your different businesses, or even kind of at Surfline, in terms of like, you know, have you ever had a situation where you've gone too broad and maybe not deep enough onto the things that are supposed to be driving your industry or your business, excuse me?
Yeah, it's a super provocative question. And I think, you know, you guys do incredible work. The content you guys build and the production value of the webcasts are it's just a whole nother level. You know, I think it's important, just like remembering the world before Surfline, you got to remember the world before the acquisition and before the WSL became what it is today. And it's night and day. And, you know, what's awesome is that people are so passionate that they like to critique things, and criticism and feedback is good as long as it's grounded in reality and it's not just, you know, hate now.
Right.
But stay the course, man. You guys are doing incredible work. From my perspective with Surfline, you know, I think, I don't know that it's a truism that big is the enemy of cool. I think cool has changed a fair bit. You know, when you're talking about apparel and you're talking about music, you know, I've got 2 teenagers, and you're not like a surfer or an athlete. You're all of those things, right? And cool to me, more and more what I see is having the confidence and conviction to be whoever you are, you know, uniquely, and both in your personal life, but also in your business life. And so for Surfline, we spend a lot of time talking about who we are and how we show up in the world of surfing. We have, in the history of the company, we've looked perhaps a little broader than we should in terms of business model. But, you know, looking at e-commerce and some of the other things like that, and Surfline has done that a couple of times, interestingly. It's not a bad idea. It's a great idea, right? We've got the preponderance of surfers on our platform. They buy stuff when they want to buy stuff from us. It's a terrific idea. It's just, we have so much value we can provide within our core experience to actual surfers that if anything that takes us off of that ball is not the right thing for now. Right. Yeah. We have so much more to do. So I think it's just about, for us, it's about staying true to who we are. And if we're cool or we're perceived as cool, it's not our first priority. Right. Yeah. We're not selling board charts. We're selling value, you know? And so as long as we're doing that, I'm not too worried.
Yeah, like cool is like a KPI or value, never really works. Like it's all just kind of like, are you being true to yourself? I always think of it relatedly, like, you know, we have like conversations on like, well, what is a kook and what is a surfer? And like, I always go back to this. I remember I read it was years ago. Like Dane Reynolds, I felt like articulated this better than anyone else. He goes, a kook has nothing to do with your surfing ability and like everything to do with self-awareness. And he's like, look, I've been around beginners who are absolutely not kooks because they know they're beginners. And then he's like, I've been around like surfers who are technically pretty good, but are absolute kooks because they think they're so much better than they are. And that has always stuck with me around like, look, it's just about being a little bit humble and a little bit honest with yourself about like what you are and what you're, I mean, you can't really have a relationship with anyone unless you have a relationship with yourself, right? And so I think that's a huge part of how you kind of design businesses and those relationships with the market as well.
100%, what you just said. You know, I think humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking about yourself in an honest way, right? Not too much and not too little. And a brand, people talk about brands, is that brand cool? A brand is a relationship, right? Yeah. To your point, if you want to have a relationship with someone, if they think too highly of themselves, and the same thing, if they think too lowly of themselves, it's hard to have a relationship with them.
Totally, yeah.
So it's about right sizing that sense of who we are in the world, and then continuing to build on that. in an honest way, being, adding more and more value over time.
Hmm. You mentioned, growing up in North County, and I don't want to misrepresent, but you've still been able to have a base there, right? Like, are you still based out of North County yourself?
Yeah, so we're, part of the reason why I'm here in Nicaragua is we're a work from anywhere company.
Yeah.
We kind of have some primary geographies where people predominantly live, kind of time zone specific. So we've got a bunch of people in the UK. We got a handful of people on the East Coast, a bigger presence here on the West Coast of the United States, and then a group of folks in Australia. Those are kind of our primary hubs. We got some folks in New Zealand, and then I'll turn up on a Slack thread or a Zoom meeting and find out someone's in Sri Lanka or
Right, yeah, right.
Germany or whatever, and it's just fantastic. Like, it's such a cool way for us to equip people to do the thing, right? Get out there, surf, adventure, even if they're not surfers. Not everybody in the company is a surfer. Get out there and be passionate about the thing you're passionate about and stay connected to that.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're work from anywhere, and we got people all over the place.
Yeah. I mean, similarly, right. Yeah. And I mean, similarly, like, it's, we're an international company, and I've probably said this for like 20 years at this point, but it's like, I always say, like, hey, there's 25 hours of work every day. And, you have to have some sort of modicum of self-management if you work at a global company, right? Because, as you pointed out, there's different time zones. And as a CEO, that actually takes quite a lot of trust in your teams, because you have to trust them that they're going to be responsible enough to get the job done, even if they're in different time zones. But I'd imagine that is probably, that cultural piece is something that's big on your priority list at Surfline as CEO.
Yep. 100%. I mean, I have enormous trust in our teams. Our leadership team is super talented, and that was one of the incredible things when I came back after 3 years. The leadership team, even the folks that I used to work with, had all advanced. And I felt a little bit like Austin Powers when he comes out of the cryogenic freezer. He's getting his hair blowing, and people. And I was just turning around, going like, "Wow, okay, we do that now. Okay, wow, we're capable of doing that." And so we've got great people. And then we've got great KPIs and a lot of clarity on what we're trying to get done. So it's sort of like between those two bookends, there's not a lot of wiggle room. There's not a lot that can go wrong. If someone just stops showing up for work, like, we're going to find out.
Right.
And
of course,
they're probably not going to work at Surfline anymore, and that's okay. Like, they've lost interest. But nobody seems to do that. We've got 105 people that work their tails off, and they do incredible work. And I just couldn't be more trusting and more enthusiastic about what they're delivering.
Yeah. As someone who started in this industry at a pretty young age, I'm talking about myself as well, but like, I think when you start young, you kind of have, the people that you work for are more senior, but just naturally, right? And it didn't really dawn on me until the last few years, because I'd be in these situations or these decision-making conversations. And in the back of my brain, I still had that, like, oh, I'm new here. Like, and I'm like, the adults need to take control here and make a decision. And then, like, you look at around the room and be like, oh, I am the adult. Like, I need to do this. And it took me a while to kind of bridge that divide. And then also to kind of retroactively think back on, they weren't people that necessarily called themselves mentors to me, but they were, and I internalized quite a lot of that stuff. And I had to kind of actively pull that out and create a more adult version of myself in the last few years, just to be at the company. I'm wondering if you had any similar experiences, and if so, who were some of the mentors you had coming up?
Yeah, no, I have the exact same thing. I mean, I just took my hat off because I have to remind myself, like, I'm full of gray hair. I am that person. Right. I am that person now, right? And
why is everyone looking at me? Like, what do you like?
Yeah, And I had gosh, so many incredible mentors. I think back all the way. One thing I didn't mention is I worked actually at Surfing Magazine before I worked at Surfer for just like a couple of months. I was commuting from college to do that, and Bob Mignona was the publisher there, and Bob was a mentor. I was fortunate enough to go on an intern and help start the surf thing at Patagonia, and connected with Yvon Chouinard, and Yvon was a mentor in so many ways. Gosh, I don't want to start a list because I'm going to leave about
No, I know
8,000
what you mean.
people out,
Yeah.
but there's just been so many people in my life, and to this day, people that show up in just the most incredible ways, and I think they know who they are, but yeah, I've had a ton of them for sure.
Have you gotten to the stage in your own role where you consciously recognize that you're probably a mentor to other people, and do you actively kind of go like, okay, like in addition to whatever professional or personal relationship you have, you go like, okay, well, if I were in their shoes, like what would be really beneficial for me to provide to them?
Yeah, for sure. It's like the most, I'm back at Surfline, um, you know, for a variety of reasons. One of those reasons is to grow as a leader and to give back,
Mm.
and to the folks around me, and the both the team at Surfline, right, the people who are my direct reports and the people who I can help grow indirectly, the people who don't report to me, but I can inspire and just help them advance their careers and have them advance who they are as human beings, is part of my mission here at Surfline. And then, expanding that a little bit, I mentioned the Oak Crest Surf Team. I've got 65 middle school students that show up for practice every Wednesday, and it's just this incredible opportunity to get involved in the lives of this like narrow band of age where so much changes, right? And they're, like I said, they're all discovering surfing. Some are better than others. Some have discovered more than others. But they're all just incredible kids, and they have so much they want to know. And it's just this fantastic opportunity to inspire them and tell them stories. And, we'll be here in 30 years or something, finding out where they're working and, who they're interviewing on what podcasts, because there's just so many incredible kids, and hopefully they're all inspired
Yeah.
a little more at the end of the experience than they were when they started.
Yeah, that's a cool way to look at it too, because I think, I kind of glossed over my little quick, origin story. But, for me, coming from suburbia that was arguably pretty homogenous in a lot of ways, like same kind of people, same kind of thoughts, same kind of stuff. Surfing to me was like a portal to like a very expansive world. Obviously, it's like you're piggybacking on the idea of adventure and getting to surf these waves and going to different places. But, the magazines at the time and kind of the editors at the time and the journalists at the time were also exposing you to different cultures and different ways of thinking and different ways of living. And it was really an opportunity for me, and I think a lot of people share this, of like surfing was a portal to broaden my perspective on like what life could be or what life could be like. And the mileage will obviously vary for everyone as we go through. But something that I kind of noticed in the mid 2000s to late 2000s is, the information age kind of kicked into gear and the social media age kind of kicked into gear, is surfing became almost more insular than it was in a lot of ways for a period of time. It came like really self-referential and almost kind of exclusionary in a way, but it feels like it's broken out of that. It's sort of been able to calibrate a little bit better in the last few years, and that storytelling's becoming a lot more deeper, or even sort of the communities are having deeper relationships than they did, maybe 15, 20 years ago. I don't know if you've experienced a similar thing in your own personal and professional life.
Yeah, well, just reflecting on what you were mentioning with regard to the folks that you worked under, or the other folks at the magazine.
Yeah.
Sam George was very much that for me. Like he had such a distinct perspective, and whether you liked it or not, it was bare bones honest, and you knew where he stood. And I just admired that courage and that conviction. And I do think we went through a period where that got lost a little bit, right? Like, you can go all the way back, Walter Hoffman just passed away on the 9th of July. And that generation of surfers were radical human beings.
Right.
Imagine growing up in this like, Laguna sort of idyllic world and going like, nah, there's too many people here. We're going to move down to Dana Point where there's no cops and nobody can tell us what to do. And we're going to literally invent an industry. Like, no, we're not going to go work for mom and dad's company. I'm going to start making surfboards out of plastics, right? I'm going to Grubby Clark, or I'm going to start a magazine, or I'm going to start a surfboard company and the first surf shop in history. Like, there's just so much to draw on there in terms of the legacy that you and I get to represent in the surf industry, right? That's our lineage. That's where we come from. I'm losing my train of thought a little bit here, but that's just like, it's so inspiring in terms of what's come before us and like how we can carry on. And now I remember what you were asking
No, no, no.
about, which is,
Actually, this took me down the
yeah,
right track, I think, for this
yeah,
conversation, because even that story about Hoffman and Gordon and those guys, Pesman moving from Laguna to Dana Point, like the genesis of the surf industry for them, it was very purpose driven, right? It was like, well, like surfers need clothes, we're going to be a surf clothing company. It's like people need to read and people need to be inspired, we're going to be a surf magazine company. Like people need better equipment, we're going to be a blank manufacturing company. And it feels like throughout, I'm going to have a sort of a smaller lens on this just with the surfing world, but throughout the surfing industry history, like the biggest brands all started from being purpose and product driven, right? Like Rusty started in surfboards, Billabong started in board shorts, Rip Curl started in wetsuits. And these were products that maybe the sales margins weren't great, but they really enhanced people's lives. And so when it came to maybe higher margin product like soft goods or t-shirts, people were like, oh, brand loyalty, I'm buying that because that board short changed my life, or that surfboard changed my life, or whatever it is. I feel like the industry probably evolved to the point where you had a bunch of brands that were like, we're a clothing company for clothing company's sake. And it's like, well, that's fine, but like what's the reason for this? And I guess it's all part of a piece, because you were talking about kind of the ultimate purpose of a Surfline as a business, and it is to enhance a surfer's daily life in a way. And that I really think there's a thread that harkens back to the origins of the surf industry in a way there.
yeah, for sure. We talk about it all the time. And Sean, I think Sean Collins was
Yeah.
very much cut from that cloth.
Yeah.
I don't think I wouldn't have the courage to be Sean. I wouldn't have the courage to be Grubby Clark
Right.
or Hobie Alter. That took enormous courage to just go like, I'm going to start a 1-900 number for surfers,
Right.
right? Like people are just like, what are you talking about? Right. And yeah, but I'm just honored to be part of that lineage and now kind of being a leader of that incredible leap that Sean took and the company took, and trying to maintain that sense of, hey, it's going to feel weird when we first do this, right? Like Premium Plus, like when first time you see it, you're probably, if you're an average surfer or you surf a lot, you're going to go, this is a little weird. What is this? And then you start to use it and you go, oh my gosh, there is so much value here. Like this little thing that I can scrub, that's what he's talking about. Oh my gosh. And then you get it taken away from you. You do the free trial and you're like, I can't live without that.
Right.
And
Right.
I've
Yeah.
experienced it when we were testing it. So I do think that's part of the heritage that we have. And I'm just indebted to Sean and the folks that came before us that had that kind of courage and conviction,
Yeah.
so that we can carry it on.
We're going to get to break here in a second, but one last question that we've been talking about it. You mentioned, Sam George and there's a dozen or more mega voices and people that had a distinct editorial perspective and an opinion. And as you said, people might not always agree with it, but it was always informative and it was always, in a way, kind of galvanizing and created like a center of gravity for people to have public discourse around. Do you see anyone today sort of occupying those voice roles in the surfing world? It's something I think about quite a lot too.
Yeah, I do. I think that the platform's gotten so much more diffuse, right? Like it's
Yeah.
so and so on social media X and so and
Right.
so
Right. Yeah.
on social media Y. And so I think there are those voices. I think they still exist. I may not know about them and you may not know about them because we don't follow that person.
Right.
I rarely use Instagram, so I wouldn't know. But I do think there's, what you guys do, you guys have a voice. I think Stab and Sam Mack have a
Sure.
voice. And then I think there's a whole cast of characters who are oppositional by trade. That's
Sure.
their strategy, is to be oppositional. And that's, not just surfing, right? That's the content strategy. That's the playbook. Modern
Right.
content playbook is pick an enemy, right? And make yourself famous by doing that. And that's fine. And people do that. I think it's all good. I just, that's not who we want to be. We want to be here to make surfers' lives better, as you mentioned. It's not about making ourselves more popular because people hate the thing that we hate.
Right,
So,
right.
so I think that you're kind of getting at that a little bit, and it is unfortunate that's happening in surfing, but it's a symptom of the broader world and the tools that we have at our disposal.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think like opposition and criticism, I think you brought up the point earlier. Like it's if it's well founded, it's really good. It only makes things better. It makes us better for sure. I think the other thing that I've noticed both inside and certainly outside of surfing is kind of the player empowerment component that probably didn't exist,
Mm,
20, 30 years
for
ago
sure.
where if you had editors and journalists that were interpreting or expressing things that were important, they often involved, the subjects were the best surfers or the best athletes or whatever it is. And certainly over the last 10 to 15 years, you've seen athletes really take control of their own storytelling, which in some ways is really interesting. But on the other side, you do probably lose some sort of editorial objectivity with that a lot of times. But I don't
Yeah.
think that's going anywhere anytime soon. I think access is kind of key. And, if Michael Jordan wants to be an executive producer on his story, then who's going to tell him he's not going to be, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. How beautiful is that? Like, I think you've got the professional athlete side, which you guys are involved in very much, but then you've got guys like Mason Ho
Yep.
or, or Nathan Florence, who is just like, how cool is that? He just puts out like the rawest, most real thing and people eat it up. Like
Of
it's just,
course. Yeah.
that could have never happened before, right? There were too many gatekeepers in the way. So
Yeah.
I think that's super cool. It gives rise to people like Ryan Birch who have a completely unique perspective on surfboards and how they should be made and how they should be ridden. Like you would have had to sift through, the gatekeepers, which you and I were a couple of them for a while. So there's some real positives to that openness that are there. That's there now.
I think I just kind of polished the gate for the gatekeeper. I wasn't actually a full-fledged, like, you can't pass sort of thing. But we're going to get one more quick break in to get a word in from our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to wrap up our conversation with Ross Garrett. Don't go anywhere. All right, we're coming back. This is the Lineup Podcast. I'm Dave Prodan here with Surfline CEO Ross Garrett. Ross, you mentioned earlier on you were in Nicaragua, and you didn't mention this because you're a humble guy, but I mentioned it. You're a very high-level surfer yourself. What does the quiver look like for you in Nicaragua? I want to know.
Well, I looked at the forecast, nothing mega for while we're here. So I just have a couple of short boards. One shaped by a guy named Ed Burke, who's been a close friend of mine for many years. Those of you that know Ed Burke and know his boards, you can count them on, you're in my hands and toes. But when you know Ed, you want his boards. So I got one of those, and then I've got one shaped by Xanadu. After Stab in the Dark, and I saw Crosby ride that Xanadu, I called Xanadu. I'm like, I want one of those. Give me one of those. So I've got one of those. Just brought two boards, and hoping neither of them break.
I love it. And I mean, we talked about it before, but like San Diego is a county and Solana Beach, North County, where you're from too. Like throughout history, so many excellent surfers, so many great shapers. The industry, when I started, like Rip Curl's headquarters was down in Carlsbad. And there was quite a lot of industry there too. And then it kind of shifted to Orange County. Feels like it's sort of leveled out a little bit, but for a period of time, like at least on the elite stage, post Taylor Knox, post Rob Machado, there wasn't a ton of activity bubbling up to that global platform of the CT from San Diego. I mean, you've been there the whole time. Like, what do you think's changed in recent years where you're getting a Jake Marshall and a Katie Simmers, where you're getting, even though he's Brazilian, someone like a Marcio Zuvi and Sharpeye being based out of San Diego is actually quite a robust board building community there. There always has been, but it feels like it's shifted a little more central to the global surfing platform in the last few years.
Yeah, San Diego is a super interesting place. It's I think as you contrast it with an Orange County where you've got, I think it comes down to the waves is what I'd say. So Orange County, you've got lowers, uppers, Church, T Street, and then you can go a little further afield, but really it's like 5 places where in South Orange County you're going to surf. And they're very specific, those types of waves, right? They suit thruster, shortboard surfing, and that's the culture of those environments. San Diego is got all these weird reef breaks and rock boils and around the corner over here, and those give rise to a different way of thinking about riding waves. And
Right.
Rob's, you see what Rob rides and how he surfs, and that's a product of that environment. And I mentioned Ryan Birch.
Yeah.
Same thing. He's got this very unique approach to riding waves. And then, there's a cultural legacy of that. Everything from Steve Liss and the Fish and Skip Fry and Richard Kenvin, like all these folks that kind of pulled these unique little strands and threads from surfing, actually all the way back to Simmons and the planing hole, right? Like, anyway, where I'm going with it is San Diego, the really talented surfers often end up on off ramps from thruster, straightforward surfing. And they get really taken with riding ASIMs or Fish or whatever, and they're enjoying it. And so I think we have a lot of that. It's also a little bit distant. It's just distance enough from the epicenter of the industry that these kids don't get snatched up at 8 years old and go, you're going to be, Jack Robinson.
Right, sure.
So they have a little more freedom in a way to like drift away from that core shortboard mentality. But the difference, I think, now with Jake and making the CT is we're incubating like incredible shredding,
right?
Specifically at like just a few key breaks down in San Diego, and I was surprised when I came back to surfing a bit more with my boys than I did in kind of the previous version of myself.
Yeah.
I was surprised the level of shred, just like outright, just ripping. And there's so many kids coming up now that are following in that path. I wouldn't be surprised if you see a couple more folks on the tour in the next couple of years or handful of years.
The point you made about like geographically being as silly as it sounds, a little bit isolated, because I mean, there's such distinct communities, Wind and Sea or, the Blacks Beach, North County, Oceanside. Like they, even as someone who doesn't live there, I can kind of identify like, oh, these are the boards that people ride there. Like Cardiff, like amazing longboard community. Like these are the characters there. I can't really do that like at other places, like in Orange County, like, because as you mentioned, like Orange County, if you're a surfer of a certain level, whether you live there or not, everyone kind of gravitates towards trestles because of the consistency. Yeah. But in San Diego, I think it's probably a lot easier to be like, oh no, I'm very content surfing the breaks in La Jolla my whole life, and it's a similar thing where people are like, yeah, why is Rio Waida the first Indonesian surfer on tour? It's like, well, the knock on that has been like, it's hard for Indonesians to leave paradise, and I think there's probably a version of that with San Diego too, just in my experience down there. Like people are just like, oh, why? Like, I like it here. I'm happy here,
Yeah. And the culture rewards that. Like there's respect and credibility that comes from following that path. And we've got our mentors, in Rob and others that have done it. And so then you look at lowers, you're like, oh, well, my mentor is right there and he's on the CT and I want to be like Griff and I want to surf like he does at this wave on that equipment. So it's just, I think that's a lot of it.
That makes sense. Well, let's bring it back to Surfline. You mentioned you're coming up on just about a year at the helm, although you have been involved at different points over the last few years. If you're looking ahead to 2025, and for the listeners, like what are the things that you're focused on as CEO of Surfline?
Yeah. So I've been in Surfline. I've been involved in Surfline for probably 13 years. And then if you tack on that sister company, probably another 3 or 4. So I've been at Surfline for quite some time. Where I see us now as compared to those other years where I've been at Surfline is we are unencumbered by tech debt. So we had a lot of kind of legacy code base issues and things that got in our way in terms of velocity. So we've gotten a lot of that behind us. And we are positioned to continue to increase the velocity that we add value for surfers so that surfers are compelled to subscribe to Surfline. That's our mission in life, is to earn the right to get your subscription dollars because we're providing that much value. How we do that, I think, is by delivering consistent value and continuing each month to deliver that. One of the things that we put in place when I came back on board was a monthly ship. So every month for the last, I think, 8 months, we've shipped feature value and told users about it. Some of them have taken off, and some of them are still waiting to be discovered. But that's priority, is just staying on that course, delivering shipping value consistently, and earning the right to call you a subscriber. So that's on the kind of the Surfline side in terms of like business objectives and what we're trying to do with the business. Zooming out a hair, I'm on a personal mission to leave surfing better than I found it. So I think the model there for me is there's a few things happening in the background. I'll pick out one, which is coming off of that smart camera technology. We are aggregating and creating data sets that the world's never seen before. How many people are in the lineup using this resource on a regular basis? How many people are on the beach using this resource on a regular basis? We're working on some things related to coastal morphology. And when you look out in the future, there's going to be a major battle for our coastline between sea level rise and the competing interests on the coast, and the coastal armoring and hardening that's happened in the coastal environment, where sand is just going away and not coming back, right? So you put all these factors in a blender, and they're going to come to a head, and there's going to be some serious battles I foresee in that space. And Surfline can be a real advocate for surfers, and be an advocate for access and enabling people to continue to access that resource in the way that they did previously. So we're just getting started on that, but it's really an exciting thing, because not only is it like a really interesting business proposition, but I think it'll be really good for the world and for surfers over time. And the reason I know that is because, or I have high conviction in that, is because a lot of people don't know both the Trestles campaign, where they're going to put a toll road through Trestles, and also with COVID, when they shut down all the beaches, Surfline data was brought to the table in both of those instances to help push that back and reopen the beaches and defeat the toll road. So those are just real world examples of what I'm talking about. So that's a high priority for me, is how do we put ourselves in a position to leave surfing better, not only for your 10-year-old twins, but for their 10-year-old twins and the ones after that, right? It's just this precious, incredible thing that we get to do, to call ourselves surfers. And I want to do what we can at Surfline to help protect and preserve it for future generations.
I love that. Before you go, we mentioned we put a feeler out for some questions from the Instagram community at the Lineup Pod. We got a bunch back for you, but we've whittled them down to 3. First question, a little spicy, but it is from @TallItLikeItIs. Asks, do you ever receive pushback from surf spots around the world where you want to set up cameras?
Yeah, we do. And we've got a process we go through to vet camera locations. I think just kind of like laddering up a level from that question, there's a question around, living as a surfer in this crowded world, right? We all live in this world that's continuing to grow in terms of population, and increasingly surfing is this incredible thing that people gravitate towards, and they want to be a part of it. And that's why we're here. That's why we're a part of it. And we can't stop that, nor do I want to stop it. I want more people of diverse backgrounds and diverse cultural experiences that can access surfing that haven't yet been able to do that. So that's the world we live in, and there's pressure on surf spots, and I totally get it, and I live it. We all live it. And I think Surfline can be part of the solution there over time. I think there's, I mentioned discovery, and what we want to do is equip people to discover that it's not just about Malibu and lowers. There's other spots you can find, and if you use the tools that we equip people with, you can help serve yourself to find those other experiences in those other places. But we're really careful about walking that line, because we know we've got a role to play there, and we know we need to lean into that. So it's this tension that we're constantly watching. Surfline's a purveyor of information, but we're also a keeper of secrets. We want to make sure that when something comes out into the surfing world, it's been chosen by the surfing world, not by us. And so that's kind of how we approach cameras. Yeah. We've got sort of like a multi-factor checklist, like, is it a known spot? Is it on a major highway? Is it regularly featured in surf media? There's about 9 factors that we go through, and equip ourselves with that decision making. But it's not willy nilly, right? We don't just go and throw up cameras everywhere. We think really hard about whether that spot's ready for one or not.
Yeah, well, I think that's well answered too, because the thoughtfulness that goes into just everything you've talked about today. But as you said, like lineups and people are going to be drawn to surfing, and populations are going to increase in the water. But lineups with higher information and better educated surfers are so much better than not, right? And so in a lot of ways, the tools that Surfline provides is creating a population within ecosystems that are better set up to have a better time because they're more informed. And the second part too, speaking from the WSL, because I think it's a little bit similar, like, the WSL's business is a platform for the world's best surfing. Our events rely on community engagement. And certainly throughout my time here, the last couple of decades, there's been times where communities are like, we don't want you here, and we haven't gone there, And so it's actually really grounding for us to have that lens on how we design tours, because it mandates that we work with those communities. And if it's like, hey, look, if us coming here for a week or 2 weeks and bringing the world's best surfers and setting up, to your point, isn't enhancing the community and it's not leaving the place better than we found it, then we don't have a reason to be there, And that's something that I think that we don't talk about a lot on our side, but it's table stakes for us even running a business, is having good relationships with those communities.
Yeah, I've watched you guys navigate that, and must be a really challenging thing to do, and I can 100% relate. I think there's a knee-jerk reaction to technology, in our case, sure, where people, like you saw, you occasionally you'll see the bumper sticker, "The leash ruins surfing," right? Like,
sure, yeah.
That was a technological innovation that enabled lots of people to surf in new and different ways. And if you weren't an expert, the consequences were reduced. So in some ways it emboldened people, but the leash is here, and it was an innovation that on the balance, kept a lot of surfboards out of landfills. So I think it's this tension, right? Like we're putting something into the world that's better for the world. If we have high conviction of that, and we have high conviction that what we're going to do is going to leave surfing better than we found it, then sometimes we have to endure a little bit of the blowback. So it's a little different than you guys, because sometimes we have to endure a little bit of the blowback from and it's usually one or two people in a community of hundreds that have a really strong opinion. And we love to engage those folks, and we love to hear their point of view. So I always encourage it, and I encourage our team to welcome it. But at the end of the day, we want to move forward, and we want to improve surfing and Surfline, and again, leave surfing better than we found it. So if I have strong conviction we're going to do that, sometimes we get a little bit of flack for it, but
we're not immune from flack on our side either. We're in good company. Second question is from El Sivieri, who says, huge fan of Surfline. Can Ross tell us a bit about his board riders contest wins?
Well, I'll correct the record a little bit. I didn't win a board riders contest. I won a tryout for the Encinitas board riders, which is pretty competitive. And I think the only reason I won is because Rob Machado graduated out of my division. But I did have
those details are lost to history. Don't worry about him.
Yeah.
Wins a win.
I had Dylan Slater was in the final. Cody Steele, who I used to surf against. A handful of really good surfers in the final, and I was stoked to take the W. So I don't know what happened. I got lightning struck, and that hit me.
I love it. Good for you. And everyone at Surfline should be stoked they have a high-level surfer at the helm. That's a great thing. Last question we picked is from Matthew Ryan Hallman, who says, what is one thing you would change about Surfline if you could go back to the infant stages of it? That's a good question.
Gosh, I mean, anything I think of along those lines would be, I just would have done certain things sooner and faster.
Sure. Yeah.
You agonize. We often agonize over decisions. Everybody does. Decisions are hard. We're in the business of making decisions, so I probably would have made the right ones faster.
Sure. Yeah. What's the internet thing about people sitting in the shower and thinking like, oh, I should have said that in the argument this morning. This would have been better.
Yeah. Yeah, it's you never know. We're navigating the world, with obscured vision. We don't really know what the future holds, but and the name of the game in our business is making decisions and learning as fast as possible. So that's what I would do differently.
Love it. Well, thank you to everyone that wrote in at the lineup pod. We're now down to our final segment, which is the lightning round. So these are 10 questions for you to answer as quickly as you can.
All right, I'll be quick.
One board setup for the rest of your life: single fin, twin fin, thruster, quad bonzer, or finless. What do you choose?
I'm just going to be a bit of a contrarian and say bonzer.
Hey.
Even though I don't have one in my quiver right now, Malcolm Duncan, if you're around, let's get an order sheet out. I've had so many incredible experiences on bonzers ever since Chris Malloy featured them in Shelter. I was like, I got to get one of those. And in fact, I ordered the Shelter board and ordered several of them after that. So if you haven't tried a bonzer, get one and ride it in hollow waves, and it will blow your mind.
The bonzer famously designed on the street that I'm podcasting from right now. I didn't know that
Wow.
and then like Taylor Knox was like, "Oh, I used to catch the bus at the end of your street," and I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he goes, the Campbell brothers live there. That's where they came up with the bonzer. I'm like, "Get the fuck out of here!" Like, oh my God. So yeah, same. Malcolm,
That's
if
cool.
you're listening, I'm happy to order one too. Next question: coffee or tea?
Decaf coffee with the layered creamer and collagen.
Oh yes. Burrito or pizza?
Burrito.
Last book you read?
A Creative Act by Rick Rubin.
Best surf film ever?
I mean, you gotta go with what hits you from your youth, and it would be probably Focus from Taylor Steele. But I would second that with Magnaplasm because of its return to cinema, the claymation, and just the creativity that Wooly and the gang put into that.
All right.
And Bruce's surfing, of course.
Oh yeah. What is one wave you never have to go back to?
Gosh, I listened to one of your podcasts, and I've been trying to answer this forever. Since
People get stumped on this one. They're like,
yeah, here's what I'd say. Back to Sam George. There's no bad waves, only bad boards. So that's a Samism, and I'll surf anything if I can choose the equipment.
I like it. If you only get to surf one wave for the rest of your life, you could dreamcast it, like just you, your buddies, perfect conditions. What wave is it going to be?
Probably the slabby right barrel that I'm going to leave for discovery for someone else with my two boys.
I like it. Best person to share a lineup with?
My kids, Henry and Conrad.
Worst person to share a lineup with?
Myself. I don't like surfing by myself. I like surfing in community with people. It's about a shared experience for me.
Okay. Last one. Finish this sentence. I will next achieve a state of happiness by?
I will next achieve a state of happiness by going surfing out front because it's looking kind of fun and I'm going to get out there.
That sounds like a perfect way to end this podcast. I want you to get out there and get some waves. Ross, Garrett, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate everything you're doing at Surfline. And hope you get some waves today and look forward to catching up with you down the track.
Awesome, Dave. Appreciate you and all you do. Thanks to you and everyone at the WCL. Keep up the great work.